The old ranch had no name left, just weathered boards, sagging fences, and silence thick enough to choke on. Evelyn Whitlow stepped through the front doorway of the long-abandoned house, the dry wind pressing against her skirts like an impatient hand. She didn't flinch. Rustwood Ranch had been forgotten. And maybe that's why she'd come. The house smelled of cedar and thyme. Floorboards groaned under her boots. A swallow fluttered out from the rafters as if startled to see a human again. Evelyn dropped her single suitcase at the threshold and breathed in. This wasn't home, but it wasn't where she'd lost everything either. She'd buy herself a little time here. Mend fences, keep her head down, maybe plant something. She didn't hear the horse until it was too close to pretend she hadn't. Turning slowly, she saw him. Broad-shouldered, dust-streaked, a wide-brim hat casting shadow across his eyes. He didn't speak, just sat tall in the saddle, watching her from the edge of the clearing like a man who didn't expect company and didn't much care for it. Evelyn didn't blink. Neither did he. And in that strange, crackling silence between two strangers and a ruined house, something old began to stir again. Rustwood Ranch didn't wake up easily. The old place creaked and shifted like a tired body in the morning. Wind whistled through broken panes. The barn leaned as if whispering its own collapse, and dry grass rustled in tones no one had heard in years. But Evelyn Whitlow had always been better with broken things. She spent her first day sweeping out rooms, dragging dead branches from the front steps, and finding ways to make silence feel like peace instead of punishment. By mid-afternoon, her hands were raw, her back tight, and her dress dust-stained from neck to hem. She didn't mind. Hard work didn't scare her. People did. That's why the man on the horse stayed in her mind long after he'd disappeared into the hills. He hadn't said a word, hadn't dismounted, just stared, like he was trying to decide what kind of ghost had wandered onto his family's forgotten land. Because that's what this was, wasn't it? His land. She didn't know his name, but she'd seen the name Hayes carved into the arch of the long-fallen gatepost at the edge of the drive. Hayes Ranch. Rustwood must have been part of it once. He hadn't tried to chase her off. Not yet. That night, Evelyn sat in the main room by the cold hearth, hands wrapped around a chipped enamel mug. The tea inside was barely more than warm creek water and mint, but it reminded her of her grandmother's kitchen. Before the fire, before the court, before the silence that had swallowed everything whole. A knock at the door made her flinch hard enough to spill it. Another knock. Not urgent, not angry, just firm. She rose, breath held tight, and opened it a crack. The man stood there again. Same wide hat, same quiet eyes. "Ma'am," he said finally, voice like worn leather. "I don't mean to bother you, but I figure we should speak." She opened the door wider, but only slightly. "About the land?" He nodded. "That and the stories getting stirred because of it." Evelyn stepped aside. He didn't move. "You sure?" "No one else knocks," she said. "That makes you polite." He entered slowly, hat in his hands. His boots didn't make a sound on the dusty floor. "I'm Calder Hayes," he said simply. She nodded. "Evelyn Whitlow." "I know." Her breath caught, just slightly. "Do you?" "My father keeps records. He said someone signed a lease on Rustwood 2 months ago. I didn't think they'd show." "I didn't plan to," she said, "but sometimes plans get burned." He nodded once. That meant more than any question she could have asked. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, where light from the setting sun painted gold along the walls. "You're not here for long," Calder said. Not a question. "I'm not sure how long is long." "You running?" Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Is that a question you ask every woman who moves into one of your abandoned houses?" He tilted his head, almost smiling. "You're the first." She sipped her mint water. "Then maybe don't ruin your record." He sat back, studying her. "People around here talk. You'll hear things. Most of them are wrong." "About you?" "About you." Evelyn set the mug down slowly. "I'm not looking for trouble." "I know. Trouble don't usually knock first." They didn't speak for a while. The wind moved through the boards above them like sighs from something long dead. Finally, she asked, "Are you going to ask me to leave?" He looked up. "Would it matter if I did?" "No." "Then no." And somehow that was the kindest thing anyone had said to her in months. Days passed and Calder didn't come back. But he didn't stay away either. Sometimes Evelyn would catch the silhouette of a rider on the far ridge. Other times she'd find a bundle of firewood stacked near the door, or a sack of flowers she didn't buy resting in the shade of the porch. He never left a note. She never asked. And Rustwood slowly, painfully, began to breathe again. She fixed the door to the chicken coop, even though there were no chickens. She swept the porch until the wood showed through. She boiled creek water and scrubbed down the rusted stove, coaxing heat from it like reviving an old friend. And then one morning she found a crate of seedlings. Fresh, green, packed in wet cloth to survive the journey. She turned in a slow circle, but the land was empty. Evelyn knelt down and picked up the small tag nailed to the crate. Just one word, plant. She laughed for the first time in months. And that night, when the stars came out soft and bright, she sat by the front window and wondered if Calder Hayes had ever laughed like that. Or if he, too, was just surviving in a world that kept asking too much. The next time he showed up, she didn't wait for him to knock. She met him halfway down the drive, hands on her hips, dust in her hair. "Do you make a habit of feeding all your tenants?" she asked. "No," he said, reins loose in one hand. "Just the ones who look like they forgot how." She opened her mouth, closed it. "Do you want to walk the fence line?" he asked suddenly. "What for?" "To see if this place still has bones. Like you said, sometimes plans get burned, but not everything stays ash." They walked the ridge for over an hour, boots crunching over dry brush and rocks. He told her about the horses that used to run there, about the storm that split the old barn in half, about the time his brother fell from the windmill and walked away laughing. He didn't talk about his fiancée. She didn't ask. They stopped beneath the cottonwood tree at the northern boundary. Calder looked out at the land, wind tugging gently at his shirt. "You know," he said, "when I was a boy, I used to think this ranch would be mine someday." "And now?" she asked. "Now I'm not sure I belong to anything at all." Evelyn looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, she realized they were the same kind of broken, just shaped different. The trouble didn't start with words, it started with looks. At first, it was the woman at the general store who paused just a second too long before handing over the sugar. Then the man who tipped his hat to every soul but her. The silence at the saloon when she walked past its doors. Evelyn knew that kind of quiet. It meant someone had started talking, and someone had started listening. She didn't need to ask what they were saying. She'd seen the way Calder's name caught in their throats, like it was too big to speak next to hers. It had been a week since they walked the fence line, since he'd told her he didn't belong to anything, since she started hoping that maybe, just maybe, neither of them did. And that meant something. But today she was in town for kerosene and nails, and that meant facing the reality she'd been trying to avoid. She saw her at the dry goods counter, pale blue dress, hair like honey left out in the sun, a girl with hands too soft for work and posture, too proud for anything but belonging. Eliza Mercer, of course, the kind of girl whose shadow didn't stretch, it floated, whose footsteps weren't heard, they were followed. Evelyn didn't need to know her to understand she'd been trained to be chosen. Evelyn had heard the name before, once in passing, once in a whisper, the daughter of the Mercers, who owned half the valley and smiled with teeth. And Calder Hayes had been promised to her since before he learned to say, "Yes, ma'am." They weren't married, not yet, but they didn't need to be. That kind of promise stuck harder than a ring. Evelyn stepped back onto the street, kerosene sloshing in her pail, and tried to steady her breath. The sun was high, but the sky felt tight. She didn't see Calder that day, not the next either, and not the one after that. But on the fourth day, she found a horseshoe on her porch, rusted but freshly set. A quiet gift, an apology. That night she sat outside on the steps, holding the iron in her lap like it might tell her something true. When Calder finally came, he didn't bring flowers. He brought rope, and he brought nails. "I thought I might help mend the fence," he said. She nodded. "It's easier with two." They worked side by side in the kind of silence that isn't awkward, just honest. They didn't talk about town. They didn't talk about Eliza. They didn't talk about why his hands shook when they brushed hers, or why hers didn't move away. But later, when the sun dropped low and the last board was set, Evelyn turned to him. "Is she kind to you?" Calder didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "She doesn't know me." "And I'm not supposed to," Evelyn said. He looked at her, and there, in the glow of dusk and dust, he didn't kiss her. He just stayed, and somehow that hurt more. The next week, Evelyn stopped going to town. She didn't need more rope, and she didn't need more sugar. But Calder kept coming. Sometimes he brought her feed, sometimes a pot of coffee strong enough to bite. Once he left a folded quilt on the porch when a cold wind swept through. Each time he came, they worked. And when the work was done, they didn't speak, but they lingered. She watched him with the eyes of someone who knew this would end badly, and stayed anyway. One evening, as Evelyn painted the front door a soft gray, something brushed her boot. She looked down. A red ribbon. She didn't own any ribbon, and she didn't need to. She turned her head slowly and saw the mercer's maid standing at the edge of the path, arms crossed. The girl said nothing. She just smiled, the kind of smile meant to slice. Evelyn didn't pick up the ribbon. She left it in the dirt. But that night she lit a fire in the hearth and stared at it too long. "Why did you come back here?" she asked him 2 nights later, as they sat under the cottonwood at the ridge. Calder leaned back against the bark, boots crossed, arms resting loose over his knees. "I never really left," he said. "That's not an answer." "It's the best I've got," Evelyn exhaled. "You're promised to her. I was 12 when they made that deal. You're not 12 now." "I know." She turned toward him. "Then why are you still holding on to it?" "I'm not," he said, eyes steady. "They are." And that was when she saw it. He wasn't trying to keep Eliza. He was trying to keep his father from breaking the only pieces of him that hadn't already been traded for land. One evening, a knock came that wasn't his. A letter. No return name. Just her name, in rough scrawl. Inside, one sentence. "You should leave before you take what isn't yours." There was no signature, but Evelyn knew. She folded the letter, tucked it under the hearthstone, and didn't tell Calder. Not yet. That week, she rebuilt the porch swing. By herself. She sanded the wood until her hands blistered, nailed each board in silence, and hung the chains like they were prayers. When Calder arrived, he stood looking at it for a long time. "Looks like it's always been there," he said. Evelyn didn't look at him. "Maybe that's the trick. Make something feel like it belongs, even when it doesn't." She sat on the swing, testing its weight. It groaned a little, but held. Calder sat beside her. The air was warm, and the only sound was the creak of the chains and the cicadas in the grass. He turned slightly. "I don't want to hurt you." She stared forward. "Then don't." He nodded once, swallowed hard. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about her. I knew before you said a word." "How?" "Because you never touched me." Calder closed his eyes. The swing creaked once more. And then he reached out, took her hand, and just held it. No kiss, no lie, no promises, just presence. And in that small, forbidden gesture, Evelyn understood. He didn't need to be hers. Not yet. He just needed to be real. The wind that morning felt different. Not stronger, just final. Evelyn rose before the sun, packed her bag with steady hands, and folded the quilt Calder had left her weeks ago. She didn't cry. She didn't even sigh. Because people who leave don't get to mourn. Not if they want to survive the leaving. Rustwood Ranch looked cleaner than when she'd arrived. Straight, tended to. Still broken, yes, but broken in the way something is before it becomes beautiful. She stepped out onto the porch, bag in one hand, the other holding a letter. She tucked it beneath the swing he helped her hang and whispered, "Thank you." Then she walked, down the drive, through the silence, and into the breathless edge of goodbye. Calder found the letter an hour later. He hadn't even planned to ride by that day. He was supposed to be at the Mercer's estate, choosing silverware patterns with a woman whose voice he couldn't even remember when she wasn't speaking. But something had tugged. The kind of tug that doesn't come from guilt or longing, but from loss already in motion. He read the note once, twice. Then he mounted his horse and turned toward the hills. Fast. Evelyn hadn't made it far. just past the cottonwoods where the trail narrowed and the hills curved like quiet questions. She was sitting on a log, boots dusty, bag unopened beside her. She didn't look surprised to see him. "You didn't have to come," she said quietly. Calder dismounted but didn't move closer. "You didn't have to leave." "I did." Her eyes were calm. "You're not mine, Calder. I don't want to be hers. You are. Even if you hate it. Even if you want to burn it all down. You carry that name. And I'm just the girl in the ruined house." He took a slow step forward. "That house is more alive than anything else I've seen in years." She didn't look away. "It's still not yours." "But it could be," he said softly. She blinked. He was closer now. "I told you once I didn't belong to anything," he said. "That wasn't true. I just hadn't found the place that didn't ask me to pretend." He held out his hand. Just that. No promises, no rings, just him. Real, dusty, torn, and hers if she wanted. Evelyn stared at his hand, then at the horizon. Then she laughed, quiet, breathless, disbelieving. "You're late," she whispered. "I always am." She took his hand, and they walked back. Together. They didn't kiss. Not yet. That came 2 nights later, after the swing creaked beneath them, and Evelyn had told him about the fire in St. Augustine and the trial she'd walked away from. After Calder told her that his father only spoke his name when there were men in the room and power on the table. They didn't say, "I love you," not yet. But when Calder reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind Evelyn's ear, and she leaned into his chest like it had always been there, love didn't need a name. It just needed the silence, the firelight, and the slow exhale of 2 people who finally stopped running. They didn't mean to be seen, but love like theirs had never been quiet enough to stay hidden. It was the afternoon sun that caught them, Evelyn and Calder, standing by the porch at Rustwood Ranch. His fingers tucked a lock of her hair beneath her scarf. Her hand rested on his chest. Not a kiss, not even a full embrace, but close, close enough. Mrs. Halder from the millinery shop saw them first. By nightfall, the whole town did. The next morning, Evelyn came into town for lamp oil and was met with silence, the kind that hummed behind teeth and behind backs. A little girl reached for her hand in the general store, and the mother yanked her away like Evelyn carried something that might stain. The store clerk rang her up without eye contact. No thank you, no small talk. Evelyn didn't flinch. She'd known worse. But later she found a boot print on her porch, one that hadn't belonged to Calder. The next morning she didn't touch the swing, just stared at it like it had betrayed her. That night she didn't light the hearth. Cold sat in the room like someone had invited it in, and a dead rabbit nailed to her doorframe. Calder rode in at dusk. His jaw clenched when he saw it. He pulled it down wordlessly, tossed it into the brush, and turned toward her. "I'll talk to them." "You can't change what they've been taught," she said, voice flat. "I can damn well try." He didn't go back to town that night, or the next. He stayed at Rustwood, helped her reinforce the fence, hauled water from the creek, sat beside her on the porch swing while the cicadas buzzed and the wind moved through the grass like breath through old lungs. They didn't speak of marriage. They didn't speak of Eliza, but they spoke. And for them, that was new. On the 3rd night, his father came, with 2 riders and a lawyer. They didn't knock. Evelyn saw them through the window, and her breath caught as Calder stepped forward, calm as a thunderhead. "You'll come home now," his father said without stepping off the horse. Calder didn't move. "This is home. This is shame. This is mine." The older Hayes scowled. "You want to throw away a future with the Mercers for this?" He nodded toward the porch, toward Evelyn. Calder didn't look back. "I'm not throwing anything away," he said. "I'm building something that never asked to be owned." The lawyer cleared his throat. "If you refuse the agreement, the land parcels dissolve. You'll lose the south pastures." "I've already lost more than land trying to live under your roof," Calder said. "Let it go." He stepped onto the porch beside Evelyn, took her hand, and for the first time, in full view of a world that told them they shouldn't, he kissed her. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't soft. It was sure. His father turned his horse around without another word. They watched the riders disappear into the tree line. Evelyn touched her lips, dazed. You could have lost everything. I already had, Calder said. This is the first thing that's felt real. She leaned into him, not for comfort, for presence, for claiming. The days that followed weren't easy. Calder's name was stripped from local ledgers. He was disinvited from the harvest fair. The Mercers sent a single white envelope with a ring inside, no note. He buried it beneath the cottonwood tree where they'd first walked the fence line. Evelyn, meanwhile, found herself watched more closely than ever. The pastor's wife avoided her in the market. A few men muttered as she passed, calling her names from the Bible twisted out of context. But some began nodding, too. The widow with the two small children near the creek started leaving her eggs in a basket by the gate. The old ranch hand from the hills offered to help repair the barn roof. A little boy left wildflowers on the swing. Not everyone approved, but some understood. One evening, as Evelyn swept the front step, Calder stepped out, dirt on his hands and a smile on his face. I found the well, he said. She looked up. What? Back behind the apple grove, buried under weeds and half a tree. But it's deep, still holds. She stared at him. We have water? He grinned. We have a future. That night they laid together for the first time. No candles, no ceremony, just breath and hands, and the kind of aching softness that doesn't ask permission anymore. And in the dark of the rebuilt cabin, with wind threading through the eaves and the scent of fresh cedar in the air, Evelyn whispered, You're not a promise I stole. Calder touched her cheek. You're the home I chose. Rustwood Ranch didn't become beautiful overnight, but it became theirs. It started with the roof. Calder climbed onto it at dawn with nothing but a hammer, 3 nails, and a grin that made Evelyn want to believe again. She stood below, one hand on her hip, the other shielding her eyes from the sun. You know that slope's gonna drop you on your back, he smirked. Then I hope you're there to catch me. By sundown it was patched, crooked, uneven, but dry. Rain wouldn't soak through anymore. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. The next week, Evelyn painted the shutters a soft blue, the same shade as the wildflowers Jonah left her. She planted rosemary by the porch and tomatoes near the fence. Calder repaired the barn doors and hung horseshoes above the entryway for luck. They worked like people who had something to prove, not to the town, not to each other, but to themselves. To the idea that ruin didn't mean the end of something. It meant a place to begin again. People still stared in town, but now they also nodded. Reed, the blacksmith, gave them nails on credit without being asked. Eliza Mercer walked past Evelyn on the street and didn't say a word. But she didn't look away either. The butcher offered them extra salt pork. And one Sunday morning, a loaf of bread appeared on the porch wrapped in a red checkered cloth. No note, no name, just warmth. Inside the house, Evelyn and Calder shared the kind of silence that feels like breath, not absence. Some nights, she'd read from the newspaper aloud while he sharpened his blade. Other nights, they'd sit on the swing without saying a word, just listening to the frogs in the wind. Once, he brought her a dog-eared book of poetry. I found this in the attic, he said, handing it to her. Thought you might like it. She opened it. Inside, in faded pencil, someone had written, Let the land be quiet, and we will make our noise here. She looked up. Who wrote this? My mother. Evelyn blinked. You never talk about her. He shrugged. Not much to say. She died when I was young. But she used to sit on this porch. Said she'd never leave the ranch. No matter what burned, Evelyn held the book like something sacred. Then maybe it's time someone made good on that promise. That spring they hosted a supper. Just 4 people. Jonah and his sister from the creek. Mrs. Ellis, the widow who left eggs. And Calder, who grilled the meat like it was sacred. They lit candles on the table, used mismatched plates, laughed more than once. And when the stars came out, Evelyn caught herself watching Calder more than the sky. He leaned over. You know, the porch doesn't creak like it used to. That's because I fixed it. He smiled. You fix a lot of things. She blushed but didn't look away. Later that night, they stood in the doorway. The house smelled of herbs and wood smoke. Evelyn leaned into Calder's chest, her head against his shoulder. I didn't think I'd ever belong somewhere again, she whispered. He kissed her hair. You don't belong to the place. The place belongs to you. She looked up at him. And there, with soft night behind them and the home they'd built wrapped around them, Evelyn said it. "I love you." He didn't answer right away. He just took her face in both hands like it was the first good thing he'd ever held. "I loved you," he said, "the second I saw you in the doorway and didn't want to look away." They didn't speak much after that, but their hands stayed close. Their breath synced, and the silence turned to rhythm, like an old house finally remembering its song. By the time summer softened into gold, Rustwood Ranch didn't look like a ruin anymore. The fences stood straight, the shutters had paint that didn't peel. Chickens scratched under the apple tree Calder swore would never bloom again. But it had. Pale blossoms opened like the land had forgiven someone. The porch swing never squeaked anymore. Evelyn still sat in it every morning, one hand around a cup of coffee, the other resting in the lap of a life she'd built from dust. Calder was always nearby, fixing things that didn't need fixing, humming when he thought she wasn't listening, saying little but meaning every breath. They hadn't married. There'd been no need. What they had wasn't a vow. It was a decision. One made each morning in the way he poured her tea or the way she folded his shirts like they mattered. That autumn, word came from the county seat. Calder's father had taken sick. Eliza Mercer had left the valley, married a lawyer in San Francisco. The Mercers kept their land, but the Hayes name faded from the ledgers like chalk in the rain. No one mentioned the wedding that never happened anymore. No one dared, because everyone could see what Calder had built instead. And it wasn't a scandal. It was home. The preacher came by once. He sat on the porch, hat in hand, asking if they wanted to make it official. Evelyn smiled, not unkindly. "We did," she said. "It just wasn't your kind of church. We didn't take vows. We built them. In fences, in supper tables, in mornings that began without doubt." The preacher chuckled and tipped his hat. "Seems like your kind works just fine." He left behind a Bible and a jar of peach preserves. She kept both. The children from the creek came often now. Jonah helped paint the barn. His sister brought wildflowers and stories. Evelyn taught her to read on the back steps, her voice gentle and patient in the fading light. One afternoon, the girl looked up and asked, "Is this your house?" Evelyn thought a moment. "No," she said. "It's ours." Calder overheard from the doorway. He didn't say anything, just smiled and tapped the frame twice with his knuckles before going back inside. He did that sometimes. Tapped wood, touched stone, like grounding himself in the truth of what they'd made. That winter, snow came late and soft. Calder and Evelyn hung pine branches in the windows and cooked too much stew. They danced once, barefoot in the living room, the fire cracking like old laughter behind them. Outside, snow coated the rebuilt porch steps. The apple tree stood bare, but proud. Inside, Evelyn watched him from the doorway and thought, not for the first time, that she never meant to stay here. But the ranch had never been about plans. It had been about choosing and choosing again. Every day. Years passed, but the house never grew quiet. It echoed with visiting children's laughter, with the rustle of letters being read aloud, with the hush of two people aging into peace. And no one ever asked them when they'd marry, because no one needed to. One spring morning, a writer from the telegraph office came with a letter from St. Augustine. An old friend from Evelyn's past had written, asking if she was alive, if she was well. She sat on the porch swing and stared at the letter for a long time. Then she handed it to Calder and said, "Would you like to see where I came from?" He shook his head. "I already know." She smiled, folded the letter, and set it inside the book of poetry he'd given her years before. "Then we'll stay," she said. "Until the house falls apart again?" he teased. She looked around at the fresh paint, the working chimney, the rose bushes along the fence. "It already did," she said, "and we rebuilt it." He stepped closer. "We always will." That night, as they sat in the porch swing and watched the moon rise over the ridge, Evelyn leaned her head on his shoulder, and in the hush of the land they'd reclaimed, she whispered, "I was never meant to stay anywhere, Calder Hayes." He touched her hand. "You didn't stay," he said. "You belonged." And Rustwood Ranch never forgot that. Not in the way the boards held strong through the storms. Not in the way the porch swing never creaked again. Not in the way every morning started with coffee and silence and love that had nothing to prove. because the house they rebuilt was a house no one ever asked them to leave. They say the land remembers what the heart builds. Rustwood Ranch never became a grand estate, never had marble floors or silk curtains, but it had laughter in the kitchen, quiet hands repairing broken fences, a porch swing that sang in the evening light, and two people who were never given permission to love, but did it anyway. Evelyn Whitlow didn't plan to stay. Calder Hayes was never meant to choose for himself, yet somehow they found each other among the ashes. Two quiet souls who taught a ruined house to stand again. No vows, no white dress, just presence. And presence, they proved, was more powerful than promise. If you felt what they built, if you saw something of yourself in their silence, their courage, their refusal to be erased, tell us. We built Wild West stories for people like you, for stories that aren't loud but last. Drop your thoughts in the comments, tell us where you're watching from, and if this one stayed with you, subscribe for more stories that don't just entertain, they echo. We don't just tell Westerns, we remember the ones the world tried to forget. The sun beat down mercilessly on Copper Ridge's main street, turning the dust into a fine powder that clung to everything like shame. A makeshift platform stood outside Murphy's Saloon, built from whiskey crates and warped planks that groaned under the weight of cruelty. The crowd had gathered early, some nursing bottles, others counting coins with eager fingers. They'd come to witness what they called business, but what tasted more like sin. Elena Rodriguez stood on those crooked boards, chin raised like a queen facing execution. Her dark hair caught the afternoon light, braided with ribbons that had once been white, but now carried the dust of 100 broken dreams. Her dress, though faded, was clean and mended with careful hands. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. Victor Castellanos paced beside her, his voice cutting through the desert air like a rusty blade. Pure Mexican blood, gentlemen. Strong hands for work, soft curves for comfort. She speaks English and Spanish, useful for dealing with the ranch hands. His laugh was wet and ugly. Starting bid is $20, but she's worth twice that in the right hands. Elena's jaw tightened. She searched the crowd with fierce eyes, daring any man to meet her gaze. Most looked away, suddenly finding their boots fascinating. But across the street, leaning against a weathered hitching post, stood a man who didn't flinch from her stare. Sam McKenna was tall and lean, with calloused hands and shoulders that spoke of honest work. His beard was neatly trimmed, his clothes simple but clean. Beside him, a boy of 8 years kicked at the dirt, brown hair falling into eyes that held too much sadness for such a young face. The man's gaze never wavered from Elena's, and something in his steady blue eyes made her heart skip. Not with fear, but with a strange, impossible hope. "Do I hear 20? Victor's voice cracked like a whip over the crowd. $20 for a woman who can cook, clean, and warm your bed proper? A few hands stirred, but slowly, reluctantly. Elena felt bile rise in her throat. She'd known this day would come ever since Victor had claimed her father's debt, but knowing and living were different beasts entirely. 25, called out a man in a torn vest, tobacco staining his beard brown. 30, shouted another, this one with hands that looked like they'd never known gentle work. Elena's fists clenched at her sides. She thought of her mother's rosary hidden in her bodice and whispered a prayer to the Virgin Mary. Por favor, save me from this hell. The bidding climbed slowly. 35, 40, 45. Each number felt like another nail in her coffin. Victor's grin grew wider with every call, his eyes glittering with greed and something darker. Then the stranger stepped forward. Sam McKenna's boots struck the ground with quiet purpose as he approached the platform. The crowd parted before him like water, sensing something in his manner that demanded respect. He stopped directly in front of Elena, his eyes still locked on hers. $100, he said simply. The crowd fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Victor's mouth dropped open, then snapped shut with audible satisfaction. Well now, Victor rubbed his hands together. That's more like it. 100 going once. Cash, Sam added, pulling a leather pouch from his vest. The coins clinked softly as he counted them out onto the platform's edge. Real money, not promises or I owe us. Elena stared at him, her heart hammering. This wasn't how rescue was supposed to look. There were no white horses or gleaming armor, just a quiet man with sad eyes and calloused hands who just bought her like a sack of grain. Going twice! Victor's voice cracked with excitement. Wait! Elena's voice cut through the air, strong and clear. She looked down at Sam, searching his face for any hint of cruelty or lust. Instead, she found something she hadn't expected. Respect. Why? Sam tilted his head slightly. Because no one should stand on that platform. Sold? Victor snatched up the coins before anyone could object. She's yours, McKenna. Handle her however you see fit. Elena's legs nearly buckled, but she forced herself to remain upright. Sam stepped closer to the platform and extended his hand, not to grab or claim, but to offer assistance. May I help you down, miss? The courtesy in his voice nearly undid her. She'd expected rough hands and rougher words, but this man spoke to her like she was a lady, not property. Slowly, she placed her trembling hand in his. His palm was warm and steady, scarred from honest work, but gentle as he helped her step down from the platform. The crowd began to disperse, disappointed that the show was over, but Elena barely noticed. She was too focused on the man who just changed her fate. Do I hear 20? Victor's voice cracked like a whip over the crowd. $20 for a woman who can cook, clean, and warm your bed proper? A few hands stirred, but slowly, reluctantly. Elena felt bile rise in her throat. She'd known this day would come ever since Victor had claimed her father's debt, but knowing and living were different beasts entirely. 25, called out a man in a torn vest, tobacco staining his beard brown. 30, shouted another, this one with hands that looked like they'd never known gentle work. Elena's fists clenched at her sides. She thought of her mother's rosary hidden in her bodice and whispered a prayer to the Virgin Mary. Por favor, save me from this hell. The bidding climbed slowly. 35, 40, 45. Each number felt like another nail in her coffin. Victor's grin grew wider with every call, his eyes glittering with greed and something darker. Then the stranger stepped forward. Sam McKenna's boots struck the ground with quiet purpose as he approached the platform. The crowd parted before him like water, sensing something in his manner that demanded respect. He stopped directly in front of Elena, his eyes still locked on hers. $100, he said simply. The crowd fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Victor's mouth dropped open, then snapped shut with audible satisfaction. Well now, Victor rubbed his hands together. That's more like it. 100 going once. Cash, Sam added, pulling a leather pouch from his vest. The coins clinked softly as he counted them out onto the platform's edge. Real money, not promises or I owe us. Elena stared at him, her heart hammering. This wasn't how rescue was supposed to look. There were no white horses or gleaming armor, just a quiet man with sad eyes and calloused hands who just bought her like a sack of grain. Going twice! Victor's voice cracked with excitement. Wait! Elena's voice cut through the air, strong and clear. She looked down at Sam, searching his face for any hint of cruelty or lust. Instead, she found something she hadn't expected. Respect. Why? Sam tilted his head slightly. Because no one should stand on that platform. Sold? Victor snatched up the coins before anyone could object. She's yours, McKenna. Handle her however you see fit. Elena's legs nearly buckled, but she forced herself to remain upright. Sam stepped closer to the platform and extended his hand, not to grab or claim, but to offer assistance. May I help you down, miss? The courtesy in his voice nearly undid her. She'd expected rough hands and rougher words, but this man spoke to her like she was a lady, not property. Slowly, she placed her trembling hand in his. His palm was warm and steady, scarred from honest work, but gentle as he helped her step down from the platform. The crowd began to disperse, disappointed that the show was over, but Elena barely noticed. She was too focused on the man who just changed her fate. The McKenna Ranch spread across a valley sheltered by red rock cliffs and dotted with juniper trees. The house was modest but well-maintained, with a wraparound porch and windows that caught the dying light. A barn stood nearby, flanked by corrals where horses grazed peacefully. It was more beautiful than Elena had dared hope, But beauty could hide danger just as easily as ugliness could. Sam brought the wagon to a stop near the front steps. "Welcome to our home," he said simply. Diego bounded down from the wagon and ran toward the barn, calling back, "I'm gonna tell Cisco you're here." "The cat," Sam explained with a small smile. "Diego found him as a kitten. Been inseparable ever since." Elena accepted Sam's help down from the wagon, hyper-aware of his hands at her waist. He released her the moment her feet touched the ground, stepping back to give her space. The gesture both relieved and confused her. In her experience, men who paid for women expected immediate returns on their investment. "You must be tired," Sam said, hefting her small bundle of belongings. "I'll show you to your room." The house was simple but comfortable inside. Handmade furniture, colorful woven rugs, and the lingering scent of wood smoke and coffee. Elena noticed the touches that spoke of a woman's presence. Embroidered cushions, dried flowers in mason jars, a child's drawings pinned to the kitchen wall. But dust on some surfaces suggested that woman was long gone. Sam led her down a short hallway and opened a door to a small bedroom. "This was—" He paused, his jaw working silently. "This was my wife's sewing room. I cleared it out for you. There's a basin for washing, and the bed's got clean sheets." Elena stepped inside. The room was sparse but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. It was more privacy than she'd had in months. "Thank you," she said, then added carefully, "What do you expect from me?" Sam set her bundle on the bed and turned to face her. "I expect you to heal. Rest. Find your footing again. Nothing more." "I can work," Elena said quickly. "I'm strong. I can cook, clean, tend animals. I won't be a burden." "You're not a burden." His voice was firm but not harsh. "You're a person who deserves basic human dignity. That's not conditional on what you can do for me." Elena stared at him, searching for the catch, the hidden meaning. Men didn't spend $100 on strangers without expecting something in return. But Sam's eyes held only sincerity and a bone-deep weariness that matched her own. "I don't understand you," she admitted. "That's all right. I don't understand myself most days." Sam moved toward the door, then paused. "Supper's in an hour. Diego likes beans and cornbread, but I can make eggs if you prefer. Join us when you're ready." After he left, Elena sank onto the bed and finally allowed her composure to crack. Tears came in quiet waves, relief, fear, exhaustion, and something else she couldn't name. She was free from Victor's control, but what kind of freedom was this? She owed this man everything and had nothing to give in return except her labor. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Elena." Diego's voice was muffled through the door. "Papa says supper's ready, but you don't have to come if you don't want to." Elena wiped her eyes and opened the door. Diego stood in the hallway holding a tabby cat that purred like a small engine. "This is Cisco," Diego said proudly. "He wanted to meet you." Elena reached out to stroke the cat's head, and Cisco immediately began purring louder. Despite everything, she smiled. "He's very handsome." "He likes you," Diego observed. "Cisco's a good judge of people. Papa says animals can tell things about folks that people can't." "Your papa sounds like a wise man." Diego nodded seriously. "He is. He saved you today, didn't he?" The innocent question hit Elena like a physical blow. From this child's perspective, it was simple. His father had rescued her from something terrible. But the adult world was never that clean. "Yes," she said softly. "He did." They walked to the kitchen together, where Sam was ladling beans into bowls. The smell made Elena's stomach clench with hunger. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a full meal. "Sit anywhere you like," Sam said, not looking up from his task. Elena chose the chair across from Diego, accepting the bowl Sam placed before her with murmured thanks. The beans were simple but flavorful, seasoned with cumin and chilies. The cornbread was golden and warm, melting on her tongue. "It's good," she said, meaning it. "My mama's recipe," Diego announced through a mouthful of food. "Papa learned it so he could make it for me." Elena glanced at Sam, who was focused intently on his meal. "Your mama, she passed away?" "Fever took her last winter," Sam said quietly. "Been just Diego and me since then." "I'm sorry," Elena's voice was soft. It's hard to lose someone you love. Sam looked up then, his eyes meeting hers across the table. You sound like you know something about loss. Elena thought of her parents, of the home she'd been forced to leave, of the dreams that had died one by one. We all carry our sorrows. They finished the meal in comfortable silence, broken only by Diego's chatter about his day and Cisco's adventures. When the dishes were cleared, Sam walked Elena back to her room. There's a lock on the door, he said, pointing to the simple latch. Use it if it makes you feel safer. And if you need anything during the night, water, another blanket, anything at all, just knock on my door. It's right across the hall. Elena nodded, touched by his thoughtfulness. Sam, why did you really buy me today? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I know what it's like to be powerless. After Maria died, I felt like I was drowning, and no one threw me a rope. I couldn't watch that happen to someone else. With that, he bid her good night and retreated to his own room. Elena closed her door and engaged the lock, then sat on the bed to process the day's events. Outside her window, coyotes called to each other across the desert, their voices lonely and wild. Elena understood that feeling. She was safe for now, but safety and belonging were different things entirely. This house held the ghost of another woman, another life that had been cut short. As she prepared for bed, Elena wondered if she was meant to fill that empty space or if she was just another lost soul taking temporary shelter. Either way, she would face tomorrow with the same dignity she'd shown on that platform. Some things no man could buy or sell, and her pride was one of them. Dawn came soft and pink over the mountains, filtering through Elena's window like a gentle blessing. She woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the distant lowing of cattle. For a moment she forgot where she was, then reality settled over her like a familiar shawl. She was no longer Victor's prisoner, but she wasn't truly free either. Elena dressed quickly in her only clean dress and braided her hair with practiced efficiency. When she emerged from her room, she found the kitchen empty but warm, with fresh coffee brewing on the stove and the scent of bacon lingering in the air. Through the window, she could see Sam in the corral, working with a young horse, his movements patient and sure. Diego sat on the fence rail nearby, offering encouragement and commentary. The scene was so peaceful, so normal that Elena felt an unexpected pang of longing. You're up early. Sam's voice startled her. He'd entered through the back door, his boots dusty and his sleeves rolled up. There's coffee if you want some, and eggs. Diego gathered them this morning. I can cook breakfast, Elena offered quickly. I should earn my keep. Sam studied her for a moment, then nodded. If you want to, but you don't have to. Elena moved around the kitchen with growing confidence, finding everything she needed to prepare a proper meal. She scrambled eggs with herbs from the garden, fried thick slices of bread, and warmed yesterday's beans. The familiar rhythm of cooking soothed her nerves. Smells good in here, Diego announced, sliding through the door with Cisco at his heels. Papa, Elena's cooking. I can see that. Sam washed his hands at the basin, then sat at the table. This is more than we usually manage for breakfast. Elena served the food, then hesitated before taking her own seat. In Victor's house, she'd eaten scraps after everyone else was finished, but Sam gestured to the empty chair expectantly. How do you like your first morning here? He asked as they began eating. It's quiet, Elena said. Peaceful. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Diego looked up from his eggs. Don't you like quiet? I do. Sometimes in town, there's too much noise. I like it very much, Elena assured him. Where I come from, there was always something to worry about. Here, it feels different. What kind of worries? Diego asked with the innocent curiosity of childhood. Elena glanced at Sam, unsure how much the boy knew about her situation. Sam gave a slight shake of his head. Adult worries, Elena said gently. Nothing for you to concern yourself with. After breakfast, Sam announced his plans for the day. Checking fence lines, moving cattle to fresh grazing, repairing a broken water trough. Elena listened, trying to understand the rhythm of ranch life. What can I do to help? She asked. Whatever you're comfortable with, Sam replied. Maria used to tend the vegetable garden and the chickens, but there's no pressure. I'd like to see the garden. Elena interrupted softly. Sam's face tightened almost imperceptibly at the mention of his wife, but he nodded. Diego can show you around while I'm out. The next few hours passed in exploration. Diego was an enthusiastic tour guide, showing Elena every corner of the ranch with pride. The garden was overgrown but salvageable, with beans and squash still producing, despite neglect. The chickens were friendly and well-fed, clucking contentedly as Elena scattered grain. Mama used to sing to them, Diego said, watching Elena work. She said it made them lay better eggs. What did she sing? Mexican songs like yours. Papa doesn't know the words, so we just whistle sometimes. Elena felt a stab of emotion. This child missed his mother's heritage as much as her presence. Without thinking, she began humming a lullaby her own mother had sung, then added the Spanish words softly. Diego's face lit up. That's pretty. Can you teach me the words? If your papa doesn't mind. He won't mind, Diego said with certainty. Papa likes it when people are happy. They worked together companionably, weeding the garden and collecting vegetables for the day's meals. Elena found herself relaxing for the first time since arriving. Diego was easy company, curious and talkative without being demanding. When Sam returned at midday, dusty and tired, he found them sitting in the shade of the porch. Elena was teaching Diego to braid corn husks, while Cisco supervised from his perch on the railing. How was your morning? Sam asked, settling onto the porch steps. Elena knows lots of songs, Diego announced, and she's teaching me to make things with the corn husks. Look, he held up a lopsided doll with wild string hair. Sam examined the creation with proper seriousness. That's fine work. What's his name? Her name is Esperanza, Diego said proudly. Elena says it means hope. Sam's eyes found Elena's, a question in their depths. She met his gaze steadily, not flinching from whatever he might see there. Hope is a good name, Sam said finally. They ate lunch together on the porch, cold chicken and fresh vegetables with tortillas Elena had made from memory. The conversation flowed easier now, Diego chattering about his corn husk doll, while Sam shared stories about the cattle and the land. The previous owner built this place with big dreams, Sam said, gesturing toward the rolling pastures. Never quite managed to make them reality, but the bones are good. Just needs patient hands and time. Time can heal many things, Elena agreed, thinking of her own wounds. Can it heal everything? Diego asked, his child's voice cutting straight to the heart of things. Elena and Sam exchanged a look over the boy's head. Some questions didn't have easy answers. Not everything, Elena said gently, but it can teach us how to carry what can't be healed. That afternoon, while Diego napped and Sam worked in the barn, Elena tackled the neglected garden with renewed purpose. She pulled weeds, watered struggling plants, and planned improvements for next season. The physical work felt good, like reclaiming something that had been lost. When Sam found her there as the sun began to set, she was kneeling among the tomatoes, dirt under her fingernails and satisfaction in her eyes. You've done more in one day than I managed in months, he observed. Elena sat back on her heels. Gardens need attention, like people. Is that what you're doing here? Tending to yourself? The question caught her off guard with its perceptiveness. Maybe. I don't know yet what I'm doing here. Sam crouched beside her, picking up a handful of rich soil and letting it run through his fingers. I bought you time, Elena. Nothing more, nothing less. What you do with it is your choice. And if I choose to leave, then I'll drive you to town myself and wish you well. His sincerity was almost painful to witness. Elena had grown so accustomed to men with ulterior motives that Sam's honest kindness felt like looking directly into the sun. I don't have anywhere else to go, she admitted. Then stay as long as you need to. They worked together in comfortable silence as twilight gathered, preparing the garden for another growing season. Elena couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so centered, so purposeful. Perhaps healing was possible after all. That night, as she prepared for bed, Elena heard Sam playing a guitar on the front porch. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, tinged with loneliness, but not despair. She fell asleep to the sound of his music, dreaming of gardens and gentle hands and a man who asked for nothing but gave everything. 3 weeks of peaceful routine came to an abrupt end on a Tuesday morning when Diego came running into the house, his face pale with fear. Papa! Papa! There's men coming up the road. Elena's blood turned to ice. She'd been kneading bread dough at the kitchen table, flour dusting her hands and apron, feeling more content than she had in years. Now that fragile piece shattered like glass. Sam emerged from the back room where he'd been mending harnesses, his expression immediately alert. How many men? 3, Diego whispered. One of them. One of them looks like the man from town. The mean one. Elena's hands began to shake. Victor. She should have known he wouldn't let her go so easily. $100 was a fortune, but his pride was worth more than money to a man like him. Elena. Sam's voice was calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Go to your room. Lock the door. No. The word came out stronger than she felt. If he's here for me, hiding won't help. It'll only make things worse for you and Diego. Sam moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peer out. His jaw tightened. It's Castellanos, all right, and he's brought friends. Elena moved to stand beside him, her heart hammering against her ribs. Victor sat astride a black horse in the middle of their yard, flanked by 2 rough-looking men she didn't recognize. Even at a distance, she could see the cold fury in his posture. McKenna! Victor's voice carried clearly across the yard. Send out my property, and we'll have no trouble. Sam's hand found Elena's shoulder, steady and reassuring. You're not his property. You're not anyone's property. He has papers, Elena said quietly. Legal documents saying I owe him money. Money I can never repay. Debt doesn't make you a slave. Diego pressed close to Elena's other side, his small hand slipping into hers. Are they going to take you away? Before Elena could answer, Sam was moving toward the gun cabinet in the corner. He pulled out a rifle, checking the chamber with practiced efficiency. Diego, go to your room, Sam ordered. Stay there until I come get you. But Papa? Now! The boy reluctantly obeyed, casting a worried look back at Elena. She squeezed his hand reassuringly before releasing him. McKenna, Victor called again. I know you can hear me. Send her out or we'll come in and get her. Sam moved to the front door, rifle in hand but not raised. Elena followed, despite his warning look. You're trespassing, Castellanos, Sam called through the door. State your business and move on. My business is with the woman you stole from me. She belongs to me, fair and legal. She made her choice to leave. No law against that. Victor's laugh was harsh and ugly. Choice? She's got debts to pay, McKenna. I own those debts, which means I own her until they're settled. Elena felt sick. She knew Victor's version of settling debts. It involved working in his saloon, entertaining his customers in ways that had nothing to do with serving drinks. How much? Sam called out. What? How much does she owe you? I'll pay it. Elena's head snapped toward Sam in shock. No, you've already done too much. $500, Victor interrupted, his voice smug. Plus interest, plus compensation for my trouble in tracking her down. Let's call it an even thousand. The sum was impossible, designed to be. Elena felt tears of frustration burning her eyes. She should have known Victor wouldn't make this easy. Sam was quiet for a long moment. Then, I don't have that kind of money. Then send her out and we'll be on our way. Like hell. Sam's voice had gone deadly quiet. Elena heard the sound of horses moving, boots hitting the ground. They were dismounting, preparing to come inside. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps. There's 3 of them, she whispered. They're armed. Sam, you can't. I can and I will. Sam met her eyes, his gaze fierce and determined. No one is taking you anywhere you don't want to go. But if something happens to you, what about Diego? He needs his father. Sam's expression softened slightly. Nothing's going to happen to me, or to you. The sound of boots on the porch made them both freeze. Victor's voice was closer now, just outside the door. Last chance, McKenna. Send her out, or we're coming in. Sam raised the rifle, positioning himself between Elena and the door. You come through that door uninvited, and it'll be the last mistake you ever make. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Elena could hear her own heartbeat, could smell the fear sweat on her skin. Then came the sound of horses approaching at a gallop. Multiple riders, moving fast. What the hell? Victor's voice cut off abruptly. Sam risked a glance out the window, then his face broke into a grim smile. Looks like the cavalry's arrived. Elena peered out to see Sheriff Morrison and 3 deputies surrounding Victor and his men, weapons drawn. The sheriff was a tall, weathered man with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much violence to tolerate anymore. "Gentlemen," the sheriff said conversationally, "I hear you're disturbing the peace out here." "This is a private matter, Morrison," Victor snarled. "That woman owes me money." "Funny thing about that," Sheriff Morrison replied, "I had a talk with Judge Patterson about those debt papers of yours. Seems there's some question about their validity." Elena's heart leaped. She pressed closer to the window, hardly daring to hope. "What the hell does that mean?" Victor demanded. "Means you've been charging interest rates that would make a riverboat gambler blush. Means you've been adding fees and penalties that don't exist in any legal document. Means those papers aren't worth the ink they're printed with." Victor's face went purple with rage. "That's impossible. I have legal claim." "You have nothing," the sheriff interrupted. "And if I catch you harassing these folks again, you'll have a jail cell for company. Now mount up and get off this property before I decide to arrest you for trespassing and making threats." Elena felt weak with relief. She sagged against the wall, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. Outside, Victor was arguing with the sheriff, his voice rising to an ugly shout. But his men were already backing toward their horses, clearly unwilling to face armed lawmen over their boss's wounded pride. "This isn't over," Victor spat as he swung into his saddle. "You hear me, McKenna?" "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Sam called back through the door. "And if you come back here, you'll deal with me personally." They watched through the window as Victor and his men rode away, their retreat swift and bitter. Sheriff Morrison spoke briefly with his deputies, then approached the house alone. Sam opened the door to meet him, rifle still in hand but lowered. "Sheriff, I appreciate you coming out. Got word from town that Castellanos was heading this way with blood in his eye," Morrison explained. "Figured you might need some official backup." "Those debt papers, are they really invalid?" The sheriff's smile was grim. "Invalid as a $3 bill. Judge Patterson's been wanting to go after Castellanos for years, but nobody would testify against him, until now." Elena stepped forward on shaking legs. "What do you mean?" "I mean you're free, miss. Completely and legally free. Castellanos has no claim on you whatsoever." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Free. After months of servitude, of fear, of feeling like trapped prey, she was actually free. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Judge Patterson reviewed those documents real careful-like," Sheriff Morrison explained. "Found at least a dozen violations of territorial law. Usury, false imprisonment, fraud. Castellanos is lucky we're not pressing criminal charges." Elena felt tears streaming down her cheeks. Free. The word kept echoing in her mind, almost too wonderful to believe. "Thank you," she managed to say. "Thank you so much." Sheriff Morrison tipped his hat. "Just doing my job, miss. Though I'd advise you to stay close to home for a while. Castellanos might be legally defeated, but he's not the type to give up easy." After the sheriff left, Elena and Sam stood on the porch in stunned silence. Diego crept out of his room, his eyes wide with curiosity and residual fear. "Is Elena staying?" he asked hopefully. Elena looked at Sam, suddenly aware that everything had changed. She was free now, free to leave, free to make her own choices, free to build her own life. The question was, what did she want that life to look like? "Elena." Sam's voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the question in his eyes. She thought about the garden she'd been tending, the songs she'd been teaching Diego, the peace she'd found in this quiet valley. She thought about Sam's gentle hands and kind eyes, about the way he'd risked everything to protect her. "I'd like to stay," she said softly, "if you'll have me." Sam's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "We'd like that very much." Diego whooped with joy and threw his arms around Elena's waist. She hugged him back, feeling the last of her fear finally release its grip on her heart. She was free, and for the first time in her life, she was choosing love over survival. The weeks following Victor's defeat passed like a gentle dream. Elena found herself waking each morning with a lightness she'd forgotten existed, the simple joy of knowing she could choose how to spend her day. No longer was she driven by fear or obligation, but by genuine desire to contribute to the life she was building alongside Sam and Diego. The garden became her sanctuary. She spent hours among the growing plants, her hands deep in the rich earth, coaxing life from seeds and tending shoots with the patience of someone who finally had time to watch things grow. Sam often found her there in the early evening, humming Spanish lullabies as she worked. "You've transformed this place," he said one sunset, settling beside her as she harvested the last of the summer tomatoes. Elena looked around at the orderly rows of vegetables, the flourishing herbs, the neat borders of marigolds that kept the pests away. It just needed attention. "Like people?" Sam observed, echoing her words from weeks ago. She glanced at him, noting how the harsh lines around his eyes had softened since she'd arrived. He seemed younger somehow, less burdened. "Are you speaking from experience?" Sam was quiet for a moment, his fingers absently stroking Cisco, who had claimed his lap as a favorite perch. "I was pretty broken when Maria died, angry at God, at the world, at myself. Diego was grieving his mother, and all I could give him was my own pain." Elena set down her basket and gave him her full attention. In all their conversations, Sam had rarely spoken at length about his late wife or his grief. "What changed?" she asked gently. "You did." The words were simple, but the emotion behind them made Elena's breath catch. "Watching you heal, watching you find joy again. It reminded me that grief doesn't have to be the end of the story." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Sam, I'm not saying this to make you uncomfortable," he continued quickly. "I just want you to know that what you've given us, Diego and me, it's more than we ever dared hope for." A comfortable silence settled between them as the sun painted the sky in shades of coral and gold. Elena found herself studying Sam's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair caught the light, the gentle strength in his work-worn hands. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Anything. When you bought me that day, did you know? Did you know you were going to—" She struggled for the right words. "Fall in love with you?" Sam's voice was soft, but the words hit Elena like a physical force. She stared at him, her heart hammering. "Is that what this is?" Sam turned to meet her gaze, his blue eyes serious and warm. "For me, yes. Has been for weeks now. But I don't want you to feel pressured, Elena. You've had enough men trying to control your choices." Elena's mind raced. Love. The word felt foreign on her tongue, too precious and fragile for someone like her. But as she looked at this man who had given her safety, respect, and time to heal, she realized the feeling growing in her chest had a name. "I love you too," she whispered, the admission terrifying and wonderful all at once. Sam's smile was radiant. "Really?" Instead of answering with words, Elena leaned forward and kissed him. It was soft and tentative at first, then deeper as Sam's arms came around her. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Mama Elena?" Diego's voice from the porch made them spring apart like guilty teenagers. "Are you and Papa kissing?" Elena buried her face in her hands, mortified, but Sam just laughed. "Come here, mijo." Diego approached with the casual curiosity of childhood, Esperanza the cornhusk doll tucked under his arm. "Does this mean Elena's going to be my new mama for real?" Elena looked helplessly at Sam, unsure how to navigate this conversation. But Sam took her hand, squeezing gently. "If Elena wants to be," he said carefully, "but that would mean she'd have to marry me first." "Are you going to ask her?" Diego demanded with 8-year-old impatience. Sam chuckled. "Well, I was planning to do it more romantically than this, but—" He turned to Elena, his expression suddenly serious. "Elena Rodriguez, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes. 3 months ago, she'd stood on an auction block, convinced her life was over. Now this man, this wonderful, gentle man, was offering her everything she'd never dared dream of. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Diego whooped with joy, dancing around them with Esperanza held high. We're going to be a real family. Wait until I tell Cisco." As her soon-to-be stepson ran off to share the news with his cat, Elena found herself wrapped in Sam's arms again. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, still hardly able to believe it was real. "I've never been more sure of anything," Sam replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Have you?" Elena thought about her journey, from her parents' death to Victor's cruelty to this moment of perfect happiness. Every hardship had led her here, to this man, to this life, to this love. "Never," she said firmly. "I want to be your wife, Sam McKenna. I want to be Diego's mother. I want to grow old with you in this beautiful place." That night, as they sat on the porch planning their simple wedding, Elena marveled at how quickly life could change. The stars wheeled overhead, bright and eternal, witnesses to promises made and love declared. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to treasure. But tonight, Elena Rodriguez, soon to be Elena McKenna, was exactly where she belonged. The wedding took place 6 weeks later under the cottonwood trees beside the creek. It was a small affair. Sheriff Morrison and his wife, a few neighboring ranchers, the Methodist preacher from town, and Mrs. Patterson, the judge's wife, who had insisted on making Elena's dress. Elena stood before the makeshift altar in a gown of ivory silk, simple but elegant, with delicate lace at the sleeves and neckline. Her dark hair was braided with wildflowers Diego had picked that morning, and she carried a bouquet of herbs from her own garden. Rosemary for remembrance, lavender for devotion, sage for wisdom. Sam waited for her in his best black suit, Diego beside him as his best man, fidgeting with excitement and importance. When Elena appeared on Sheriff Morrison's arm, he had volunteered to give her away, Sam's face lit up with such joy that several of the women in attendance dabbed at their eyes. The ceremony was conducted in both English and Spanish, honoring Elena's heritage. When they exchanged vows, their words were simple but heartfelt. "Elena," Sam said, his voice strong and clear, "I promise to love you as you are, to protect what we build together, and to give you the freedom to grow into whoever you're meant to become." Elena's voice was soft but unwavering as she replied, "Sam, I promise to love you with my whole heart, to stand beside you through whatever comes, and to help you raise Diego with all the love I have to give." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was tender and full of promise. Diego cheered loudly, and even Cisco, watching from his perch on a nearby fence post, seemed to approve with a satisfied purr. The celebration that followed was joyous but intimate. Mrs. Morrison had contributed a beautiful cake. The neighboring ranchers brought fiddles and guitars, and as the sun set, the little gathering became a proper frontier wedding dance. Elena found herself passed from partner to partner, welcomed warmly into the community she was now officially part of. But her eyes always returned to Sam, who watched her with such love and pride that her heart felt like it might burst. "Happy?" he asked when they finally had a moment alone together. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Elena replied honestly. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and Diego had been tucked into bed with strict instructions to stay there no matter what he heard, Sam and Elena found themselves alone on their wedding night. The house felt different somehow, not just physically but emotionally. This was their home now, their life together beginning in earnest. "Are you nervous?" Sam asked gently as they stood in the hallway, between their rooms, Elena's former room and the one they would now share. "A little," Elena admitted. "Good nervous, though." Sam took her hands, running his thumbs over her knuckles. "We don't have to do anything you're not ready for, tonight or ever. This marriage is about more than—" Elena silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her love and trust into the gesture. When they broke apart, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'm ready, Sam, for all of it, for you." Their wedding night was everything Elena had hoped for, and nothing like what she'd feared. Sam was gentle and patient, treating her with the reverence due something precious and fragile. When morning came, Elena woke in her husband's arms, feeling truly whole for the first time in her life. Over the following months, the McKenna family settled into their new rhythm. Elena officially adopted Diego, giving him the mother he'd been missing and herself the son she'd never expected to have. The boy thrived under her attention, learning Spanish songs and Mexican recipes alongside his regular schoolwork. The ranch prospered too. Elena's organizational skills and hard work complemented Sam's knowledge of cattle and land management. They added chickens and goats, expanded the garden, and even began talking about building additional rooms onto the house. On their first anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching Diego play with Cisco in the yard, Sam pulled out a small wrapped package. "What's this?" Elena asked, accepting the gift with surprise. "Something I've been working on," Sam said, suddenly shy. Elena unwrapped the package to reveal a beautifully carved wooden box. Inside, nestled in soft fabric, was a silver locket engraved with roses and her initials, E.M. "Sam, it's beautiful," she breathed, lifting the delicate chain. "Open it," he urged. Inside the locket was a tiny photograph, Diego, Sam, and Elena together, taken by the traveling photographer who'd passed through town the month before. They looked like what they were, a family, happy and complete. "I wanted you to have something to remind you," Sam said softly, "of how far you've come, of who you are now." Elena fastened the locket around her neck, feeling its comforting weight against her heart. "I love you, Sam McKenna. And I love you, Elena McKenna." As the sun set over their valley, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and rose, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought of her parents, whose memories she honored in the Spanish she taught Diego and the recipes she prepared. She thought of Victor, whose cruelty had inadvertently led her to this happiness. She even thought of that auction platform, which had seemed like the end of everything, but had actually been the beginning. Some endings, Elena had learned, were really doorways in disguise. "Mama Elena," Diego called from the yard, "come see what Cisco caught." Elena laughed and rose to investigate, Sam's hand warm in hers. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to treasure. But she would face them all with the unshakable knowledge that she was loved, she was free, and she was home. The auction block was far behind her now, nothing but a painful memory from another lifetime. Here in this place of growing things and gentle hands and morning coffee, shared in comfortable silence, Elena had found something no amount of money could buy. A love worth fighting for and a life worth living. As the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, the McKenna family headed inside together, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. Some folks aren't born belonging anywhere, but sometimes all it takes is a look, a hand reaching out, or a door opening when you least expect it. That's when everything changes. The land feels different, names start to matter, and silence turns into trust. If this story struck a chord with you, if you felt something when she crossed that threshold, when he made room in his world without asking for anything in return, or when that final yes was spoken, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell us what moment hit the hardest. And most of all, where in the world are you watching from? Are you tuning in from a small town like Dusty Fork, a city porch at sunset, or somewhere in between? Because this channel doesn't just echo the past. It carries your voice forward. This is Wild West Stories. And now, you're part of it.